Hello and welcome to this episode of Let's Talk About by Kangaroo Minds. I am Vedika and our topic for today is mental health first aid. For this conversation, we have with us today none other than CEO of Mental Health First Aid England, Simon Blake. As CEO, Simon focuses on leading the organization to achieve its vision of normalizing conversations and attitudes towards mental health, as well as looking to train 1 in 10 of the population in mental health skills. In 2020, Simon was named as the Global Diversity Leader and made it to the 2021 Pride Power list as well. He is a writer, campaigner, and trainer, and was awarded the OBE for his services to the voluntary sector and towards young people in the year 2011. However, before we begin our conversation today, we would like to put out a little trigger warning for our audience. If at any point during this conversation, should you find yourself feeling triggered or distressed, we urge you to take a step back and look after yourself. Should you need any additional support resources, you can also find them on our website. Now, without taking much time, let's dive in to hear more from Simon. Simon, welcome to the episode, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you with us today. And I'm really looking forward to the conversations and all your insights.
Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure.
So Simon, I'm going to start off with, my first question, which is mainly around, can you tell us a little bit about what is the mental health first aid training all about and, who can sign up for this?
Sure. So mental health first aid training is available in lots of different parts of the world, in 26 different countries. And as you said, I'm based in England. But it's got common features, and really it's about understanding about mental health, about signs and symptoms of poor mental health or mental illness, and how to provide initial conversation, how to enable effective signposting and support for somebody who needs help. But importantly, it's also about understanding our own upbringing and how that's impacted on our understanding of mental health. So our frame of reference, what do we understand about mental health? Understanding about stigma and the role of stigma in preventing people getting the help they need. So really about that context of mental health, mental illness, stigma, the impact of stigma, and then how do we spot signs and symptoms and provide that initial point of contact and support for people and enable us to signpost into other places of help.
So would you say that, to do the mental health first aid program, does someone need to be a mental health professional? Do they have to be a medical practitioner, or can anyone take up this program?
No, the really important thing about mental health first aid is our belief that anybody should be able to have that initial conversation, that people need to have that understanding. And our specific mission in England is to train 1 in 10 of the adult population, because we believe that will create the cultural tipping point and the cultural context by which we actually have enough people who understand and can have conversations. So anybody can do the training. And the really important point I think that you make that is, at the end of it, you are not a mental health professional. You're not a psychiatrist, you're not a psychologist, you're not a counsellor, you're not a therapist. You are a person who has got some basic understanding and skills around mental health that enables you to have those conversations and be that first point of support.
So I think, you mentioned something really important, and, I myself have done the adult mental health first aid training from Mhfa England. But just for the audience, can you further highlight on the aspect that, what is the role of a mental health first aider, and, what can you do and what can you not do in that position?
Sure. So I think it's really important to say that if you do a mental health first aid course, you learn skills which enable you to have those conversations and do the signposting. If you then, and you can use those in your family, in your community, in any different environment. So I, as somebody who's trained in mental health first aid, will use that skills and knowledge and understanding in my personal life, with my partner, with my friends, in my family, in my sporting interests. And that is different. That isn't me as a mental health first aider, it's somebody with those skills. But then in an organisation, you might be a mental health first aider, which has a specific role. And that role is really, again, about being identified as somebody that you can have a conversation with if you are worried or feeling unwell or want to get some information which enables you to access further support or to understand what might be happening. But also mental health first aiders might also be proactively looking to see if they see somebody who doesn't look well or is there are some changes in their behaviour. And so if you are a mental health first aider in a role, it's really important that your organisation is clear about that role. How is that connected to a line manager? How is it different from the human resources department? And so a mental health first aid should be another form of support within the organisation, not the only form of support.
I think that's really important, that the various contexts within which a mental health first aider can act and look out for people, be it, in a micro level in terms of friends, family, or, just looking beyond in terms of organizations, looking out within our communities for other people as well.
On our website, we've got a guide for mental health first aiders and also a guide for organisations about having mental health first aiders, which just talks about that importance of understanding your role, understanding your boundaries, understanding when you might need to step back as a mental health first aider, and then for organisations to think about a whole organisation approach and to have a mental health strategy, of which mental health first aid is part of that.
So you just mentioned a very interesting point, which is around the boundaries of being a mental health first aider. So do you want to tell us a little bit, about what kind of boundaries should people in that role have?
The most important one, of course, is that you feel well and able to take on the role. So that's the most important one, that we practice that self-care, which we demonstrate, which we are so clear is really important. And that, if at any point, for any reason, you don't feel as though you're in a position to undertake the role, then that is a really, really important boundary. And, somebody might step back for 2 or 3 months and then say that they can do it again. Either there's too much going on at work, or there might be something going on in their personal life, or they might be experiencing a particular episode of their own health. So there might be any reason why somebody says, I'm not in a position to do it. And that's the first boundary. The second then is being really clear that you are not a medical professional, you're not a mental health professional, you are not about diagnosing, you are not about advising, you're about somebody who has a conversation and then can signpost to other forms of help and advice if people need it. And that's the other really important bit. We're not in the role, we are not clinical professionals. We're definitely not in a position to do that. And then also, I guess, it's also not a therapy relationship, a therapeutic relationship either. So, recognising that boundary, that whilst you might give support to somebody more than once or provide information or be a point of contact more than once, that it isn't an ongoing therapeutic relationship either.
Right. So, that being said, why should someone consider doing the Mhfa training according to you?
So when I did it, I wish that I'd done it 20 years before. It was one of those courses where I just thought, wow, this would have really helped me to have been a better partner, a better friend, a better son, a better brother, and a better manager at work. And the reason that I thought that is I really, for the first time, having done lots of awareness training about mental health, but what this did is it equipped me with a real understanding around what you can practically do when you believe that somebody needs help or when somebody comes to access help, and to do that in a way which felt as though it was within the skills and boundaries that I was confident to do. So my real belief is that all of us could benefit from doing training which helps us to understand that we all have mental health. each and every one of us has a brain, so we all have mental health. That we understand the difference between mental health, promoting mental health, between mental health and mental illness, and that we understand and recognize the signs and symptoms, but also the role and negative impact of stigma and what we can do to challenge that. So for me, it really is a set of skills which anybody and everybody in a range of different settings and contexts could really benefit from. And then in the context of organisations, having mental health first aiders enables an organisation to demonstrate that they take mental health seriously, that they recognise its importance, and that they invest in the time and energy to enable people to provide that support to their employees.
Right. I think, like, you know, as you said, even for myself, after doing the mental health first aid, the adult training, I think it makes you feel a little more comfortable when you go out and help people. I mean, I know a lot of people tell you, okay, you know what, just listen actively, and, you know, you'll hear the whole don't be judgmental, but sometimes you just don't know how to do it. So I think the training kind of puts you in that space where you feel more equipped to be able to help someone out. And at the same time, just knowing how to recognize resources which you can signpost someone to, you know, the different kind of issues that people are having, like even the do's and don'ts around helping someone with a range of different conditions.
Really important, because we so often want to help that we actually don't realize that the best thing that we can do to help is to listen, and to really listen so somebody really feels seen and heard. And that's the bit which I hear time and time again. People say, I realize I don't have to be an expert. I just had to listen well. I realized that I didn't have to, it didn't help for me to say, I know exactly how you feel, to just listen and say, that sounds really difficult. Or, to know that you could confidently say, I don't know, that's outside of my understanding, but we can try to get help for you. So just those skills that sometimes I think we think we're better than we actually are at listening. Sometimes I think we're better than we actually are at demonstrating empathy. And this course really helps you to do that.
No, I definitely agree with that. And, you know, that being said, how would you say that, you know, the mental health first aid training is different from psychological first aid? Because a lot of times we see that, you know, the terms are used interchangeably.
So psychological first aid is really about an immediate response to traumatic incidents or disasters. So it's designed to reduce the incidence of post-traumatic stress disorder. And the basic principle of that is that support from somebody who's trained in psychological first aid, an intervention that is quick after the incident, may prevent long-term injury. So it's very much around incident and disaster and trauma-based. Whereas mental health first aid is really about that wider recognition in everyday life about the impact of poor mental health, of mental illness, and what we can do to spot signs and symptoms, move on. So they are really quite different. One is very much, psychological first aid is very much about trauma and disasters, and mental health first aid is very much about everyday circumstances, that longer term and community approach.
Right. But, you know, in terms of looking at the larger ecosystem around mental health and mental health services, where would you say that Mental Health First Aid England and the work that you do sort of fits into that puzzle?
Sure. So I guess it depends how you want to draw the sort of ecosystem, isn't it? And this is very much about a public mental health campaign. It's about promotion of positive mental health, about learning and understanding about how to protect our own and other people's mental health and well-being, and to ensure early intervention, so that when there are early signs of poor mental health, mental illness, that you get that early support. And so it's very much, I guess, at that, for everybody, sort of a level of intervention. Whereas services, whether that's mental health promotion services might be targeted, they might be for specific groups or specific communities, mental health services for people with mental illness or particular conditions. So this is really that sort of, I guess, the wraparound. It's about trying to create that mental health literacy in the wider population so that we can really all do all that we can to look after our own and each other's mental health, to get a greater level of awareness, which enables us to look after and protect ourselves, rather than in the system, in the services where people have a mental illness or a mental health condition and need specific help, or those targeted interventions where we know there are higher risks of poor mental health outcomes and inequalities.
The very important part about, which even I felt about the MHFA program, is that it targets mental health literacy and awareness. It's about, promoting mental health and how to help individuals in distress. But keeping that in mind, one of the challenges that I have personally come across, and I know we've spoken about it earlier as well, is that just like other fields, there are a lot of counterfeits in the space of mental health. And the risk which pseudo professionals and unauthentic, if I could say, training programs pose is something which, I wanted to ask you about, that, how can you check the authenticity of a program which is being delivered in the name of mental health first aid?
Sure. Well, one of the most significant ways that you can do that is whether it is a licensed provider under the Mental Health First Aid International programme. And Mental Health First Aid International is based in Australia, which is where the concept of mental health first aid originated from, and founder was Betty Kitchener. And there are licensed programs around the world licensed by Mental Health First Aid, and we have to prove that we are sticking to the design and principles of Mental Health First Aid. On the Mental Health First Aid England website, there are some principles which underpin mental health first aid. Those are globally recognised principles which have been set out by Mental Health First Aid International. And so for me, the first would be, have you got a licensed provider? That would be your number one. But there are others who are not licensed provider, but even if they're not a licensed provider, do they meet those principles which are set up by the authority, the international authority on mental health first aid? I guess the other bit, and the bit which really worries me, is that there are very short programs. There are very short programs, and it takes time to learn about the different conditions, around stigma, around the skills, around the step-by-step process which we use. And you can't do that in 1 hour, in 2 hours, or in 3 hours. And so really that time, if it's online, is it about the equivalent of 2 days? And if it's less than that, actually, I would have some questions as to whether it's living. Now, some of that may be self-directed learning, and some of that may be live learning, but overall it should be about that sort of 14 hours worth of time. And then the other thing, which I think is really, really important, is any program that doesn't adopt positive language, inclusive language, is one to be really worried about. We know that there are some programs where actually some of the language that's used, some of the slides reinforce stigma about mental health. So, the kite mark, the international kite mark, does it meet the quality principles? Does it have sufficient time? And is it using inclusive and positive language?
Right, because, as I said, one of the concerns which people don't realize is, how do we check? Because there are programs running in the name of, okay, they'll call themselves peer mental health first aid or campus mental health first aid, or you'll have a half day, certificate in mental health aware. But that's where the concern begins, because, as you know, and I know, and anyone who's done the MHFA would know, that the first step towards the LG is to assess for risk of suicide or to assess the crisis level. And if you're not competently trained to do that, I think as such, those conversations are hard. One of the, the feelings we always get is, are we accidentally going to put the idea in someone's head? So proper training ensures that we don't end up in that path. But then if you're not adequately trained, you don't have a licensed provider, you may run into that risk.
And the really important bit is that it is irresponsible for people to say it's mental health first aid if it isn't, because it means that people who haven't had the appropriate level of training may believe that they are more skilled than they thought, or indeed to think, well, I've left that course not knowing what to do, and therefore undermining the principle of mental health first aid. So it is really, really important that those quality standards, those principles are upheld, and that's, as you say, why people should be aware, about actually the key bit of a mental health first aid program is it's a skills-based course. If there's any course without skills and skill development and skill practice in it, then it's an awareness course. And nothing wrong with an awareness course. We all need to have different levels, but it's, if you want to drive a lorry, you don't learn to drive a car. You learn to drive a car and then drive a lorry. So it's knowing what you are skilled and able to do.
I think that's a very valid point, right? That there's no harm running awareness programs, but the minute you start giving people titles which are actually linked to specific skill sets, to specific roles, I think that's when it starts getting a little dangerous. But moving forward, who would you say is actually qualified to deliver a mental health first aid program?
So we at Mhfa England have instructor members, and they go through a rigorous instructor training program, and that instructor training program is accredited by the Royal Society of Public Health in England, and those people are trained to deliver the licensed program which we deliver at Mhfa England, and so from an Mhfa England perspective, it's anybody who is able to demonstrate that they are a certified instructor and instructor member from Mhfa England.
I think the reason I primarily asked this is sort of going back to, when we spoke about the roles as a mental health first aider, is to sort of know that, just because you are a mental health first aider or if you are a mental health professional, that doesn't automatically qualify you to be able to deliver an MHFA program, because sometimes, again, looking at a quality check, I think that also becomes a parameter.
Yeah, it is about having the knowledge and skills and qualification to be an instructor. That doesn't mean that somebody who's skilled at something else doesn't have lots of knowledge and lots of understanding. It means that they're not qualified or certified to deliver an mental health first aid course as licensed by us.
Right. How do you feel that having an understanding of mental health first aid can help individuals make a difference on a larger scale, so within communities, within workplaces?
So what I see and what brings a real smile to my face is, that people learn the mental health first aid skills and they may or may not go on to take a mental health first aid role, but they also just get that fire in their belly. They get that awareness and the understanding of the injustice, around mental health and mental health stigma and inequalities that drive mental health, and they champion it, and they will use the awareness weeks, and they'll have conversations over dinner, and they'll talk about it with their friends, and they'll make sure that they post something on Facebook or on LinkedIn about whether it's suicide awareness or World Mental Health Day and the themes around young people's leadership or whatever it is. And so really what mental health first aiders often do is without necessarily knowing, become part of a movement for change. They take it into their communities, and much as the conversation that I've had with you. You're doing this podcast now, you do all the work with Kangaroo Minds, and you do so much more than mental health first aid, and that's part of your work and part of your conversations, and I think that's what's so inspiring, that you learn skills, but you develop your passion and you get that fire what we call the fire in your belly, and you're determined to make change, and that's, yeah, absolutely delightful.
No, I think, as no, I mean, thank you for all the kind things that you said, but I think mental health first aid also not just gives you a better understanding of, yourself, you become more aware of what you're going through, but it also really normalizes the entire conversation. Like, you can actually draw a distinction between mental health and mental illness. So, if 1 in 5 people have a mental illness, but 5 in 5 people have mental health, and I think that awareness really comes through with the program. You can see on a scale, how people are doing, and it's not a black and white thing. And I think that's what the program also teaches you, to be aware that you can be anywhere on that spectrum.
Yeah, and I think you also learn about what you can do for yourself. That I'm not a mental health expert. I've come in 3 or 4 years ago and learned so much. But what I've learned in my professional life, I've also realizing now in my personal life, the importance of sleep, the importance of not drinking too much alcohol and drinking water, the importance of exercise, the importance of good nutrition, the importance of making breaks from work. So, and resting well, and doing the things which give you joy. And so that's why it feels so relevant as well, isn't it? It's about, this makes the world a better place, and all of us hopefully want the world to be a better, fairer, more equal and just place, and this is part of that. So yeah, that's it. Yeah, it excites me really, to think of so many people getting that understanding for themselves, for their children, for their families, for their communities.
I think that also, what you mentioned, really ties in very well with, what was this year's theme about, like, mental health in an unequal world, especially looking at the way Mhfa impacts the inequalities which exist. But looking at now marginalized communities, be it ethnic groups, be it the LGBTQI community, be it refugees or religious minorities, how do you think we can better look out for them?
So the really important piece in this is recognizing that that mental health is both a cause and consequence of inequalities, but that mental illness doesn't discriminate, and that none of us can afford to be silent where there are inequalities. And so really it's about recognizing the impact of prejudice, discrimination and inequality on mental health and on people's experience of mental health services and mental health support, and always looking through that lens of inequality. That if you look at COVID, where people say, well, we're all in the same boat, we're not all in the same boat. That people say time and time again, we're all in the same storm, but some people are in yachts, some people in canoes, and some people clinging onto dinghies, and that is just not good enough. And all of us that are concerned about mental health need to be really concerned about inequalities as well. And so I think it's making sure that a friend used to say that we go where angels fear to tread. That we're not afraid to have conversations, and that we are alert to the inequalities that exist, and that we continually challenge ourselves and other people to create the change, empowering other people to create the change, and recognizing the importance of inequality.
You mentioned about encouraging conversations and creating dialogue, not just around inequalities, but in general about mental health and mental health awareness. So how do you think we can better do that?
So to me, I think it's finding ways to just continually have that conversation. Whether it's I have a niece and a nephew, and a great niece and a great nephew, and I not sitting down and going, we need to have a big conversation, but talking about what are the things that you enjoy, what are the things that you want to do more of, what are the things that you don't enjoy, how do you know when you're feeling tired or when you're feeling unwell, and making sure. So my little nephew, he's very, very cute, young, and whenever he says, "I'm not feeling very well," I was like, "Oh, is it your body or is it your head?" And when I first said, he said, "So, you know, my head doesn't feel bad." And now every now and then he's like, sometimes it's my head and sometimes it's my knee. And it's just those things of just trying to create awareness wherever we go in the conversations. You know, he's very little, but you know, with adults and just talking and understanding and building it in as part of everyday conversation, so that people know that you're wanting to talk. People know that you're happy to talk. People know that you are not supportive of stigma. So yeah, you hear people talking about people being mad, or that's madness, or that's crazy, and it's lots of things. It might be wild, it might be inappropriate, it might be awful, it might be horrendous, but it's not crazy. It's not mad. And just trying to make sure that we are tackling that stigma wherever and however we see it, but also encouraging people to think about their emotions, think about their brains and the interrelationship with their minds and body. And we'll all have different opportunities to do that. And you know, if you're a doctor and you're talking to somebody about their physical health, you know, talking about that and their mental health. So my mum had cancer last year, and I don't remember anybody talking to her about how she's feeling mentally about it. Lots of conversation about the physical change, and such a wasted opportunity. You know, and at the same time, you know, my dad, you know, has, you know, he's you know, almost 80, so has regular visits to the doctor. Since mum died, he's not had anybody who said, you know, how are you doing mentally? You know, they're checking his blood pressure, they're doing his feet, they're checking his back, but they're not checking his mind. And actually, again, that's a wasted opportunity, and that's in the medical field. You know, you're a hairdresser, or if you're, you know, sitting in a space with somebody as a mentor or as a coach, whatever it is, we've always got the opportunity to ask how people are, to generate the conversations about mental health, about well-being. And I think COVID, actually, one of the things which certainly in the UK I've noticed is that more people are checking in with each other. They're checking how people are feeling. They're doing more in their communities, and that's great. And that's something we want to try and take forward into whatever happens in this next phase of the pandemic and beyond.
I think, you know, you mentioned something very important around, like, you know, the language that we use and how, like, our semantics actually do matter. Like, you know, there's a lot of controversy sometimes on Twitter that I see that, you know, some people will be like, no, semantics don't matter, semantics are just semantics. But I think as a mental health first aider, one of the things you do realize and you see firsthand, and I think you even highlighted, is how big a role does the language that we use play into the stigma that, you know, goes around about mental health. Because many times we'll see individuals who are extremely racist or, you know, xenophobic, they will be called, oh, you know, this person is just psychotic, like these are psychotic views, or even around the term suicide, using the phrase committed. That is used a lot. And how do you think we can better look out and help make people more aware about the way, you know, language plays a role towards mental health?
Yeah. Well, you know, our language is how we communicate what we think and what we feel and what we value. And, you know, whether that's the way that we talk about women, or the way we talk about LGBT people, or people of colour, or disabled people, or whatever it is we're talking about and communicating, it's language which demonstrates empathy and demonstrates care. And so that, I guess, is something which we just have to keep on talking, reminding, communicating, using that understanding. Because I think it was only when I started working in mental health and I really was thinking about stigma that I realized just how exclusive and excluding language was around mental health. And so many of us, it's not that we intend to use language that is offensive or stigmatizing. We just haven't thought about it. And so as we learn, yes, Maya Angelou, I think, wasn't it, said, do your best until you know better, and then do better. And so often I think we can end up in arguments about things, whereas actually sometimes it's just, did you know that when you say that it says X, Y, and Z? Because most of us don't want to be horrible. Most of us don't want to reinforce prejudice or reinforce stigma. So I think it's that gentle piece, that gentle education piece, which we should really just be thinking of. And that's our role as mental health first aiders in relation to what we can do with the knowledge that we learn on the courses to try to change the culture in which all of us are living.
I think so much of it even starts in our classrooms, right? Like it's only like now that we know better around mental health that there are so many things that even I've picked up. For instance, you will have teachers telling kids and English teachers telling children that don't use the word sad, why don't you say depressed? Or, you say things like, oh, I'm not feeling worried, make it anxious. Or say, like you see very casually these terms being used as adjectives. The weather is not unpredictable, the weather is bipolar. So I think it's just about knowing and sort of having that awareness, and maybe it's also coming from educators, making them more aware of, even the language that comes in day-to-day conversation, because so many times you just don't know, and you will say the word I'm feeling depressed, but when you dig a little deeper, it's so different from just being sad or feeling blue.
Yeah, I think you absolutely made a really, really important point. And I think that actually, if you think about saying that you feel stress is good. Stress is a performance enhancer to a certain level,
yes.
And then stress becomes a problem. Feeling anxious is a usual response, but it's when it becomes a problematic response and an anxiety disorder that it is problematic. And so I guess it's that clumsiness, isn't it? And the more that we can be precise about the language we use, the more that we can make sure that we're not trying to encourage creative language, because I suspect the examples you just gave, people are trying to get vocabulary to be widened, but actually what that is doing is saying giving false messages. So you may not want somebody to say they're feeling sad all of the time, but there are lots of other words that demonstrate sad or the equivalent of sad without moving them into a different set of words and a different set of meaning.
True, because as we rightly said, that these are not adjectives. You will not use the word cancerous to describe a person, but you would use bipolar to describe a person. So since when did it become okay? And somewhere, because we're taught that, depressed is okay as an adjective, being bipolar is okay as an adjective, we feel that it's okay to describe people using those terms, but we would never use physical health conditions to describe people. So I think, maybe that's something which definitely, I think as a mental health first aider, we need to look out for more and sort of kindly, as you said, not be horrible, but politely tell the person that, hey, we can do better.
Yeah, and there's a phrase, isn't there? Speak the truth quietly and clearly. You don't have to challenge. It doesn't have to be ferociously done. It can just be, did you know? Or even, I know that we've often been taught that at school, but actually what that means is this, and this. So, I think there's a really important education job. It's as simple as that, isn't it? That education job that we've got as people who've been trained.
True. So I think, moving forward, you made a thing that how you noticed in the COVID that people were checking in more on each other. And, we've seen mental health garner a lot of importance within conversations right now as well. So keeping in mind that, we're heading for what everyone is calling a new normal, what is something you would like to see making its way into the new normal?
Yeah. So I really hope that we take this sort of growing awareness about the importance of creating, I guess, communities that care, that care about ourselves, that care about each other, recognise our interdependencies. We'll check in with each other, we'll provide support, and perhaps most importantly in that is sometimes we over-rely on people who might need help to ask for it. So how do we flip that on its head and recognise and create cultures which lean into things? We know, when there are difficult events, whether that's divorce or separation or bereavement or somebody's having a difficult time at work or whatever that is, rather than saying, just ask if you need anything, going, okay, I know that you're going to need food. I'm going to help with the shopping. Or, I know that if I ask if you want company, you'll say no. We're coming round, to do X, Y, and Z, or take the dog for a walk, or look after your child for a while, whatever it is. So I think we can get better at going, I know that that you may not ask for help. I know you may even refuse help if I offer it. So I'm going to just do some of those things, and if we can become more aware of that random acts of kindness, that we so often talk about, that they can just change the world. And the Mental Health Foundation in the UK, they did some research last year at which over 75% of people said that they'd like to come out of the pandemic with more kindness in the world, and that's kindness towards them, and then them doing more acts of kindness as well. So three quarters of people and more in the UK saying, come on, let's get better. So that would be my hope.
I think that's really lovely. And just being kinder, and as you said, looking out for people, because we do often tell people reach out, but maybe sometimes we forget that in that position you're not really always in a position to be able to reach out. And some people also culturally may just resist help, right? Because they believe that asking for that help makes them weak or makes you incompetent or less capable.
Yeah. So I guess it's so if we were to think about a phrase that would go with reach out, so it'd be reach out and lean in. Let's have more leaning in, so that people have to reach out less, that there are already people leaning into them.
I think that's really beautiful. I think the whole reach out, lean in concept. So to wrap up our whole discussion today, I'm going to ask you, what would be your parting words, Simon, to anyone who's watching this or listening to this today, who's having a hard time with their mental health?
So nothing is too big or too small to talk about. And I say that because sometimes people are like, well, this isn't that bad. People down the road, this is happening. Somebody over there, that's happening. If it feels big, it's big. And sometimes people don't ask for help because it feels too big. And nothing is too big. There is always something that can be done. And there is always someone who is able to walk alongside you and work that out. So my mantra, I think, is nothing's too big or too small to talk about and to get help with. And please don't sit on your own, because there are always people who want to walk alongside, always people who want to do that. And just to do that, to live a bit of what we just talked about, the reach out, lean in. So you just said, what would be your words to people who are struggling with their mental health? I guess the other side of that would be, for all of us, there will be people around us who could do with a hug, who could do with some love, who could do with some kindness. So lean in, so that those people know that you're there and that you're willing to do anything you can to help them and support them.
I think that's been really nice. And I think, as you said, you've given something for both sides of people to take out from this and take back home. So thank you, Simon, for all your time, for having this conversation with us. I think it's been very enriching and very, very informative. And I'm sure anyone watching this is really going to benefit, not just by understanding more about mental health and mental health first aid, but more around what we all can do as an individual at our own level to make a difference, whether it be at a micro or a macro level. So, and lastly, for anyone who's watching this, if you're having a hard time with your mental health, just know that, there is help out there. You don't have to suffer alone. Things do get better and you really deserve to feel better. So reach out, and to everyone else who might know someone who's having a hard time, as Simon said, lean in, check in on someone. It can really make a big difference. So till next time, please stay well and stay healthy. Thank you.